you said something like Hollywood raised you in a way, like brought you into this manhood.
What a journey.
How did you, like, what brought you to Hollywood? So you said you grew up in New York. What brought you?
Was that where you grew up?
I grew up in New York, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was always very leery of Hollywood. I didn't have any viable skills because I was kind of a rebel. Dropped out of school.
What were you into?
Punk rock.
Like what?
Well, like,
Let me light up. Did you see
Mark's
that?
like a huge punk rocker here. Yeah.
Well, it was more just, like, it's not, punk rock, sure, but just the punk mentality.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure. That's really...
Yeah.
Did you play in a band?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
What was the band called?
Oh, man.
I'm all over you now.
Which band? The first one?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Oh my God. The first band I was in was not punk rock. It was funk.
Okay.
Funk.
Because of course, when you learn that George Clinton is a thing and funkadelic is a style of music, and you hear "Can You Get to That" for the first time, you're just like, oh my God, you can do this with music? I want to do that. So we were called UFOs.
Nice.
Unidentified funky organisms.
All the acronyms of the 90s. When was this around?
Yeah.
Like, probably.
I mean, I was like 15.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So do the math. I don't know. I mean, it was
That's...
early 90s.
Okay.
And then did it transition into skateboarding and punk rock and like...
I never got into skateboarding, although if you ever watched that movie Kids.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that was basically my life.
Oh, my God.
I knew all of those people. Those were real...
Like,
a lot of them...
Casper and Telly and...
So they were actors, but they were also real street punks.
So you were in that.
I mean, that was like my New York scene, right?
For sure.
So I hung out with some of those guys, and then was afraid of some of them, and some of them I was like, I would never, do what those guys are doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that film really captures the milieu and the vibe of New York in the early 90s, growing up. I mean, and looking back at that, I was like, holy shit, no wonder I turned out the way I did. It was a pretty gnarly upbringing, with just like no parental guidance. My mom was working, my dad was ghosted, and we were out in the streets. We would pound the fucking pavement. We would just hit the streets.
Wow.
And then find places to hang out. And if it wasn't like breaking into an abandoned building or going into a park and like finding a weird, creepy part of the park where there's like bushes and no one can see you, and you're basically sleeping in rat piss, and like it's just like, what are you doing? It's just, well, because we wanted to just hang out and be together, and there was no place to go in New York City. There's not a lot of space.
Yeah.
So
Kids,
it is what it is.
I must have rented that movie as a teenager, like more than any other movie. And we romanticized it. So you lived the thing we romanticized.
Right. And then parents were horrified, like, oh my, this is terrible. And for us, it was just normal. It's Yeah. Well, 40 ounces and,
40
doing bad stuff. And this, look, teenagers are going to, push the envelope.
Yeah.
But in the city, it's just, I guess, a different vibe when... especially, in the 90s when I guess it was I guess they had the AIDS theme.
Mm-hmm, yeah, that came in.
But I remember back in the day when we watched that, we thought it was a little corny because the AIDS epidemic we'd kind of gotten over it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, we had condoms and we had sex ed and we all knew how to avoid AIDS, right? Mm-hmm. We can be responsible, but that was still, I guess, a conflict device.
It was interesting in the script like that, I thought. Like, the director, though, I forget his name. I saw him.
Harmony? No, not Harmony Korine.
Because he did like Gummo and a few other films.
That would be Harmony.
I think so. And he had some...
But he didn't direct that, though.
Didn't he? Oh, okay.
I think he...
Maybe it wasn't Gummo.
Wrote it or something. I'm not remembering exactly.
I don't know. It was like...
But Gummo's awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if you get canceled for saying that anymore. Like,
I
think about all the movies I watched and loved, and how you would never be able to make them now.
No.
You would never be able to tell those stories.
No, it's crazy, right? The cancel is a strong force
culture is
in
strong right now,
maintaining culture these days, where I think that was like a fascinating time where that would end up on a Blockbuster shelf and you'd be like, what's that? And it would just rock my entire like reality, because you're like, that's art. Like, there's realness to it all. Like, it was really
and
cool.
it was semi-docu style.
Yeah,
you
totally.
know? It was like a reality show with a narrative woven into it somehow.
Yeah.
Very inspiring for me, certainly as a filmmaker growing up.
Eh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you made a few movies.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, I think we were looking into trying to sort of see the body of work that you've been a part of. And the Paparazzo.
No, I made about 5 or 6 films, both as a director and producer. And
so, I mean...
mostly documentaries, actually.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And
So when did this love for film and TV start for you? Like from an early age as you were a punker? And
Yeah. For me, it was all about being independent and doing it ourselves and pushing against the grain. And, you know, Hollywood was like this was before it was okay to be in a band and then like sell your music to a commercial. Like we still had real values, you know, and so Hollywood for me was just like a land of sellouts.
I was in a band that did one of the first sell to a O. Henry commercial.
Oh,
we
don't
got
say it ain't so.
Fucking crucified. Crucified.
Now it's,
oh my God.
Get yours, yo. Make some money.
Totally. But back then it was just like, it taught me a lot to do something like that, to step out and be like, well, fuck it. We'll take the money and do something good with it. And we did. Like, we took the money, we bought a tour van, we went and like continued making our craft. Like, it empowered us. But
so this is an interesting point of conversation, because at what point did those subtle decisions made across a generation who decided, well, fuck it, I'm just going to sell out now, get us to where we are, where everybody's a fucking sellout and everybody's looking to just make a buck and nothing is authentic, and now we've all sold our souls on some level.
right.
It's like almost like the last bastion of like ethical. Yeah, I mean, maybe it was like flimsy at the time, but
Yeah.
I just wondered, like, did we start to sell ourselves more and more? It became easier and easier to just give everything to corporations, and now everything's commercialized.
oh my God, yeah.
Everything. From our like politics being captured all the way down to the anything cultural.
It started with you, man.
I don't know.
You fucking
You're
did
O.
it.
Henry.
You were that
the
straw.
The O. Henry bar campaign. Oh my God, that's so funny.
Come on, cut to that right now. Well, yeah. And so what I used to do, this was the way I justified it. I used to do one for them, one for me.
Yeah.
One for them, one for me. So I was like consciously selling out, rolling my eyes the whole time. And then I'd go do something indie and cool. And it would be a fucking pain in the ass. And it would always be like not exactly what I wanted because I didn't have enough money to do it. But before I got Entourage, I was on my way. I was in Mexico. I had $1,000 in the bank, and I was on my way to Cuba. I was sneaking into Cuba to make a documentary about Cuban hip hop.
Wow.
And this is before cell phones, before like barely, we had dial up. So I was in the internet cafe, and I get an email from my manager. It's like, oh, there's this show called Entourage. You're perfect for it. You should check it out. And I was like, yeah, I don't do TV. And he's like emailing me. He's like, it's not TV, it's HBO. I was like, HBO, I don't have cable. You know, it's just like, basically I was just like, no, not doing it. And then he basically said, in so many words, either come to audition or find another agent, because I used to just blow off all the auditions because I was doing other things in all these indie projects. And so I ended up, I got it. I was like, okay, I can only turn my back on Hollywood so much before they'll just find another, young pretty boy. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. So I email him back. I'm like, can you send me a ticket? Because I had no money. He's like, okay, you loser. And I was like, and I need to sleep on your couch. He's like, yeah, I got you. So my manager basically flew me out to LA. I stayed on his couch, and I ended up getting Entourage. And never made the documentary that I wanted to make about Cuban hip hop. But that just goes to show you the contrast. And like, once I got that role, I signed a 6-year contract.
Holy shit.
It wasn't one O. Henry contract. Right? It was like 6 years of selling out. And I was just like, okay, I'm in it. Here I go.
Wow.
How did you cope with that? Like coming from one place, like I have very similar things that I went through, but not on much the same level of heights. Like I did a similar thing where a guy offered me a chance to be the bass player, like to try out to be the bass player for Avril Lavigne. And I was running a record label, an indie punk label. I was like running a recording studio.
I love this guy.
Doing all the stuff, right? Like in Toronto, like just like on my own,
punk,
like just being a scene guy. Like, and I was like doing the thing, right? And then same kind of story, really interesting. Like you can go tomorrow, I got a ticket for you. It's a thing, you know, there's this girl, it's pop, it's not your world, but they really need a bass player. They need someone really cool.
You're gonna bring the cool to the band.
Totally, right? And I'm like, I was always of the nature of being like, if you don't, I can't judge it until I see it, right? So I was like, fuck, all right, I'll go. Like, you know, whatever. Like it'll be interesting to explore. And of course, like the universe gives me the gig. And then you have the question, and I don't know if you had that moment of like, if I sign into this is like the optically to the world. To myself, I know what I can do with it, but to the world, it's optically everything I'm not. And ultimately, like that was probably one of the hardest things I had to choose in life, which to most people, they're like, it's a gig with a giant pop star, like she wasn't anything yet, but like to the rest of the world, they'd be like, why would that be hard? But coming from the ethical point where
becoming less and less hard.
Right.
Yeah.
But so how was it for you when you're like 6-year contract? Like that's a big choice.
Well, I was about 27 at the time, and I'd resisted for long enough that I knew, and there's part of me that was resisting because I didn't think that I had the fortitude, like the constitution to be able to resist the gnarly treachery of Hollywood, like to walk through the valley of death and survive it. I was like, I'm just not mature enough, or I'm not self-aware enough, I'm not strong enough to make it through. So I resisted. But around that time, I was like, you know what? I can do this and still come out relatively, adjusted.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I barely made it out, man. It was hard. I barely just in the nick of time made it out. So I'd been wrestling with that for a long time. And in fact, I mean, this is a funny... I went there, and you have to sign the contract that you're going to do it before you audition, because they don't want you to audition.
6 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Before you even get the part, because they want you to promise you're going to do it, because they don't want to be like, yeah, you can do it, and then you have to negotiate. Then you have the leverage to negotiate, or you say no, and now they've wasted all their time. So you have to say you're going to do it before they even audition you. So I was like in agreement. Wow. I was hanging out at my manager's office, doing dial up because I had, nowhere to be. I didn't know anyone in LA. And he came in having gotten the call from the studio, and he for the first time, this was the first person that ever called me by this name. He looked at me and he went, Vince. He called me by that name, and I knew I got it, obviously. And I hung my head, and I was like, fuck. Because I knew that this was going to be a long-term, I knew it was going to be big. I knew it was going to be a thing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, my whole life's going to change. I'm not going to Cuba now to make the film. I got to probably live in LA or something, fucking LA. And I'm fucking diehard New Yorker street rat, fucking practically from the movie Kids. And now here I am in LA about to do 6 years on a show, about like superficial things like chasing chicks and like, buying fancy cars, which I wasn't into because I was like a proper indie kid.